Okay, strap
Yeah.
yourselves in, folks, because today we're diving into some seriously mind-bending territory. We're talking about quantum immortality. Yeah, you heard that right, quantum immortality. The idea that maybe, just maybe, consciousness doesn't actually end. It just shifts to parallel universes when we die. Sounds like something straight out of sci-fi, right?
It does have a certain science fiction ring to it.
But hold on, because it gets even wilder. We're talking about surviving everything, even a supernova swallowing the Earth.
That's where things start to get really interesting.
So to guide us through this labyrinth of mind-boggling possibilities, we've got some academic assignments and a research paper by a guy named Alexei Turchin, and let me tell you, this guy is diving deep into the deep end.
He certainly doesn't shy away from the big questions.
No, he doesn't. So get ready for some serious head-scratching as we explore questions like, could you really survive everything if this whole multiverse thing is true? And what about the problem of eternal suffering? Like, if you can't die, does that mean you could be trapped in some cosmic nightmare forever?
That's one of the more unsettling implications we'll be exploring.
And how does this quantum immortality idea change how we think about things like cryonics, or even the risks we take in our everyday lives?
It definitely adds a new dimension to those considerations.
So yeah, we've got a lot to unpack today.
Most people have at least heard of the many worlds interpretation, the idea that every quantum event spawns a universe for each possible outcome.
Right, like there's a universe out there where I actually chose the salad instead of the pizza for lunch.
Exactly, but Turchin takes it several steps further with this paper.
Oh, really? So it's more than just infinite realities where I made different choices.
Way more. He's exploring what he calls multiverse immortality.
Multiverse immortality. Okay, that sounds intense.
It's based on two key assumptions.
Yeah.
First, the universe or multiverse has to be enormous, potentially infinite, to accommodate all those copies of us surviving every imaginable event.
Okay, infinite universes. That's a lot to wrap my head around.
It is, but it's a key part of this theory. And the second assumption is this idea of a copy-friendly theory of personal identity, meaning our consciousness continues in those copies across different universes.
So hold on, am I getting this right? Does that mean I wouldn't actually experience death? I'd just keep finding myself in a universe where I dodged whatever bullet was coming my way.
That's the basic idea from a subjective perspective.
Whoa.
Think of it like the classic quantum suicide thought experiment, where someone plays Russian roulette with a quantum device.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
The theory says they'll always find themselves in a timeline where the gun didn't fire.
So no matter how many times they pull the trigger, they survive in some universe?
Exactly, because their consciousness shifts to the timeline where the chamber was empty.
That's both fascinating and a little bit terrifying. So does that mean with enough universes we could even survive the sun going supernova?
Theoretically, yes.
No way.
There might be timelines where we're whisked away by benevolent aliens, or where the laws of physics just work differently.
Okay, so we're talking about surviving literally anything.
It's all theoretical, of course.
Yeah.
We're deep in the realm of speculation here, exploring the edges of what's possible based on our current understanding of physics.
Right, we're not saying this is definitely how things work, but it's a wild thought experiment. So let's assume for a moment that this multiverse immortality idea has some merit. What are the practical implications? Does it change how we should approach things like cryonics? Or even the everyday risks we take?
It certainly raises some intriguing questions.
Like what?
Well, for example, if we consider cryonics, the practice of preserving bodies after death in hopes of future revival, it becomes a much more appealing proposition with multiverse immortality.
Because even if the revival tech doesn't exist in this timeline, it might in another.
Exactly. Your consciousness could continue in a universe where that technology is available.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. So cryonics gets a boost.
The subjective probability of successful cryopreservation skyrockets with this idea.
Okay, so what about the other end of the spectrum? Does multiverse immortality change how we think about things like euthanasia?
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to the discussion.
How so?
One of the most unsettling implications of potential immortality, even a multiverse kind, is the possibility of eternal suffering.
Okay, yeah, that's a chilling thought. If you can't die, does that mean you could be trapped in some horrific situation forever?
It's a concern that Turchin addresses in his paper.
So what does he say about it?
He argues that the risk of eternal suffering might be less severe than it initially seems.
Okay, that's slightly reassuring. But how?
For one thing, he suggests that the measure or likelihood of timelines involving unfavorable outcomes declines over time.
So the longer you survive, the less likely you are to end up in a bad situation.
It's a bit of a silver lining, yes.
I'll take it. So is that all he says about eternal suffering?
He actually goes a bit further. He suggests that for simpler minds, those experiencing brain damage, for instance, timelines, might actually merge.
Wait, timelines merging, what does that even mean?
It's a complex concept, I bet. But the core idea is that this merging could make favorable outcomes more likely in the long run.
Okay, my brain is officially starting to hurt, but I'm intrigued.
It's definitely a mind-bending idea.
So is there anything else Turchin brings up that might help with this whole eternal suffering problem?
He also points out that certain types of preferences aren't affected by these changes in measure. For example, if someone's primary goal is simply to experience at least one good outcome, then the overall prevalence of those good outcomes in the multiverse becomes less important.
So basically, if there's at least one timeline out there where things turn out, well, that's all that matters.
For some people, that could be enough.
I guess that makes sense.
Hmm.
But this is all still based on the idea of multiverse immortality, which is a pretty big if.
Absolutely. It's still a very open question.
But even as a thought experiment, it's pretty wild.
It challenges our fundamental assumptions about life, death, and the very nature of reality.
No kidding. Okay, so we've laid the groundwork with some of the basic concepts, and I'm already feeling the existential weight of it all. But before we go full-blown crisis mode, I really want to hear more about this idea of merging timelines.
It's definitely one of the more mind-boggling aspects of this whole theory.
It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It does have that kind of feel to it.
All right, so let's dive into some of the specifics. I'm ready to get weird.
Let's do it.
All right, so merging timelines. You said it relates to simply minds like those with brain damage. How does that work? Are we talking about different versions of me in different universes somehow becoming one?
It's not quite like different yous combining into a single being. It's more nuanced than that.
Okay, so what's the deal?
Turchin's idea is that for minds experiencing certain states, like severe brain damage, the distinction between those branching timelines might become blurred.
Blurred, what would that even look like from the perspective of that consciousness?
It's tough to say for sure. We're dealing with concepts that go beyond our current understanding of consciousness.
Right, it's all very theoretical.
But one way to think about it is that the experiences from those different branches might start to overlap or blend together. Instead of distinct, separate timelines, it becomes more like a merging stream of consciousness.
Okay, I'm starting to get a hazy picture, pun intended. And you said this blurring could actually make pleasant states more likely. How does that work?
Well, remember how we talked about the measure or likelihood of timelines declining over time?
Yeah.
This merging of timelines could act as a counterbalance to that decline, particularly for those less complex minds.
So even if the measure of a specific pleasant timeline decreases, it could get a boost from merging with other timelines.
Precisely. It's like those timelines, instead of fading away, entirely contribute their experience to this merged stream, potentially making those pleasant states more persistent.
So it's like a kind of averaging effect.
In a way, yes.
That's pretty fascinating. It kind of flips the script on the whole eternal suffering problem, at least for certain types of consciousness.
It does offer a potential mitigating factor. Of course, it also raises some very interesting questions about the nature of personal identity and the continuity of consciousness if timelines converge like that.
Yeah, no kidding. This is making me rethink everything I thought I knew about reality. Okay, so we've got cryonics becoming more plausible and a potential workaround for eternal suffering. Are there any other practical implications of multiverse immortality that Turchin explores?
Absolutely. He delves into how this idea might change our approach to global catastrophic risks.
Okay, like what?
Imagine threats like nuclear war or a large asteroid impact. With multiverse immortality, we have a sort of plan D for survival.
Plan D, we've got Plan A, prevention, Plan B, bunkers and refuges, Plan C, leaving traces of humanity behind for some future intelligence to find. What's Plan D?
It's survival through sheer improbability.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine a scenario where a catastrophic event wipes out most of humanity in this timeline. There might be branches of the multiverse where, against all odds, a small group, maybe even a single individual, manages to survive. Through some unlikely chain of events.
So even if it's a long shot, a tiny sliver of possibility, there's still a chance that humanity in some form continues somewhere out there.
That's the implication. And from a subjective perspective, assuming multiverse immortality is true, those surviving timelines, however improbable, become the ones we would experience.
So it's like a cosmic safety net, even if it's full of holes. Does that mean we should just throw caution to the wind and not worry about preventing these catastrophes? Because, hey, we'll survive in some other universe?
Not at all. It's crucial to remember that multiverse immortality, even if true, doesn't diminish the importance of our actions in this timeline.
Right, it's not a license to be reckless.
We have a moral obligation to work towards a better future for ourselves and future generations, regardless of what might be happening in other branches of the multiverse.
Okay, that's a good point. It's not an excuse to just give up.
Exactly.
But it does add an interesting layer to our thinking about existential risks. It's like even in the worst case scenario, there's a sliver of hope, a flicker of consciousness continuing somewhere out there.
That's one way to look at it.
So we've covered cryonics, euthanasia, global catastrophes. Are there any other everyday choices or actions that multiverse immortality might influence?
Well, one area that comes to mind is our approach to life extension.
Okay, how so?
If we're talking about extending our lifespan, even if it's not about achieving full-blown immortality, it aligns very well with the implications of multiverse immortality.
Because the longer we live, the more chances our consciousness has to hop to those surviving timelines.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
And even if multiverse immortality turns out to be false, the pursuit of a longer, healthier life is still beneficial in its own right.
It's a win-win.
Exactly.
But I'm sure there are plenty of people out there thinking, wait a minute, isn't this just a glorified gambler's fallacy? Just because you've survived a few close calls doesn't mean you're invincible. How does Turchin address that kind of skepticism?
That's a valid objection, and Turchin doesn't shy away from it. He uses the example of someone living to an extraordinarily old age, say 140 years old.
Okay.
Given the average lifespan and the fact that the oldest person ever recorded lived to 122, surviving to 140 would be a significant outlier.
So basically defying the odds to that degree could be a hint that there's more going on than just chance.
Exactly.
That we're dealing with a much bigger playing field than we realize.
Right.
And the more we learn about the universe, the more we discover just how vast and complex it truly is.
Absolutely.
Okay, so throughout his paper, Turchin focuses on multiverse immortality from a very scientific and mathematical perspective. Does he ever touch on the philosophical side of things? You know, the big questions about the meaning of life, purpose, and all that?
He does, though. It's not the primary focus of his work. He acknowledges that multiverse immortality, if true, has profound implications for how we understand our place in the universe and the meaning we ascribe to our lives.
Okay, that's interesting. Can you give us a sneak peek into those philosophical ponderings?
Well, one thought-provoking idea he raises is that even if our consciousness continues in some form across the multiverse, it doesn't necessarily mean we're truly immortal in the traditional sense.
What I thought the whole point of multiverse immortality was that you can't actually die.
It's more nuanced than that. Remember how we discussed the measure of timelines potentially declining and fragmenting over time?
Yeah.
Even if there are always timelines where some version of you exists, those timelines might become increasingly less coherent, less you like as time goes on.
So instead of a glorious, never-ending existence, it could be more like a fading echo across a multitude of universes.
That's a possibility, Turchin suggests. It raises questions about what it even means to be alive, or to have a lasting legacy in a reality where our consciousness might be spread so thin across the multiverse.
Wow. It's almost like multiverse immortality solves one existential problem, death, but then creates a whole new set of philosophical dilemmas.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so fascinating to explore. It pushes us to confront not just the idea of our own mortality, but the very nature of identity, existence, and what it means to be human in a potentially infinite and ever-branching reality.
My brain is officially fried, but in a good way. This has been one wild ride.
Yeah, I think I need a moment to process all this too. Multiverse immortality merging timelines. Eternal bliss, eternal suffering. It's enough to make anyone's head spin.
Definitely a lot to take in.
But that's what I love about these deep dives. They really make you question everything you thought you knew.
It's all about pushing the boundaries of our understanding.
And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface today.
Oh, there's so much more to explore.
Especially in a field as complex and rapidly evolving as quantum physics. We're eager to delve even deeper into these mind-boggling ideas. Where would you recommend they start?
Well, for anyone who really wants to get into the nitty-gritty details, I highly recommend checking out Alexei Turchin's full research paper. We'll definitely include a link to that in the show notes, and I know our online community is going to have a field day with this episode.
This is the kind of stuff that sparks some really intense debates.
Which is exactly what we love to see.
It's all about getting people thinking and engaging with these big questions.
Exactly. So to wrap things up, is there any final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Let me see. I guess if I could offer one piece of advice, it would be this. Don't be afraid to embrace the mystery.
Embrace the mystery.
The universe is a vast and wondrous place, full of questions we may never fully answer.
And that's okay.
It's the journey of exploration, the questioning, the seeking, that truly enriches our understanding.
That's a beautiful thought.
And it expands our horizons.
Well said. So on that note, I think it's time to let our listeners go forth and ponder the infinite possibilities of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride. Through the realms of quantum physics consciousness and the mind-boggling concept of multiverse immortality.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
Until next time.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep your minds open to the wonders of the universe.
And happy pondering, everyone.